Let's go back to the time when Junhee had just become a second-year student. The flowers were blooming along the sidewalk and the weather was beginning to warm. Meanwhile, our protagonist clumsily entered the classroom where he would spend the next year. Classes had been divided according to elective subjects, and either way, he wasn't particularly close to the other students. Looking for a seat, he found one available behind Hannah. However, before he could sit down, she apologized and asked if he could find another spot because she wanted to sit next to her friend. Junhee understood, and just then her friend arrived. Not wanting to cause any trouble, he moved to find another seat. Hannah mentioned that he didn't mind giving up the seat, so Junhee took the blame and apologized for trying to sit there first. Dasom, the girl for whom he had moved, seemed to understand. It was the first time Junhee had ever seen her. Her long, straight hair framed a beautiful face, and her voice was soft. From that day on, Junhee secretly fell for Dasom. For him, the first impression he made by giving up the seat had been perfect. Still, he wondered if she even remembered it. Eventually, he found another seat, right at the front. With no better options, he sat down and focused on studying. When he glanced at his new seatmate, he noticed she wore enormous glasses, leading him to guess her vision must be pretty bad. From day one, she was already deep into her books. Doyeon asked if there weren't any other seats available, and Junhee nervously asked if he could stay there. She didn't mind, but seeing him in the front row, she assumed his eyesight must be poor too. However, from Yooni's perspective, she looked terrifying every time she took off her glasses. Her expression shifted into a constant frown, as if she were always angry. That's when some of Doyeon's friends appeared, asking if she would hang out with them after class. Junhee saw them as a couple of loudmouths, but what struck him more was how popular Doyeon seemed to be, with friends even from other classes. Doyeon asked what they wanted because she needed to study, something they didn't believe. They couldn't understand why she chose world history when she had always been bad at academics, or if she was trying to raise her grades to get into university. Annoyed, Doyeon stood up and yelled at them to shut up and leave. She was studying seriously. For Junhee, this confirmed that when she was angry, she could be truly frightening. Still, Doyeon kept shouting, telling them she wouldn't hang out with them anymore and they should leave her alone. Not as lazy as them, she wanted to be left alone to study. Faced with this, her friends decided they would never hang out with her again, no matter how much she begged. Doyeon cursed under her breath and then sighed, apologizing to Junhee for the commotion. However, he didn't mind at all. That was how he had his first encounter with her. At that moment, their teacher rushed into the classroom, introducing herself as their homeroom teacher. Since it was already late, she went straight to the point. She wanted the class to be a pleasant and quiet place, but they needed to vote for class representatives. She had a great idea. She pointed to Junhee and Doyeon and asked them to play rock, paper, scissors. Both agreed without issue, and after a quick game, Doyeon won. The teacher wrote down their names. Doyeon would be the class representative, and since Junhee had lost, he would be the vice representative. With that decided, she asked them to greet everyone every morning and then rushed off, leaving both quite confused. Back to the present in the room, things seemed relatively calm, at least on the surface. Junhee was still trying to calm Doyeon down, hoping she wouldn't panic and would just listen. He introduced himself as Junhee, the second-year class vice representative, and began to explain his situation. He needed money and had therefore joined the experiment. However, he noticed the chalice had gotten stuck on his clothes, so he tried to remove it. At that moment, Doyeon blushed immediately. Worried, Junhee apologized, thinking he had scratched her, and assured her he would just pull his hand away and asked her not to scream. He then asked if she was okay. Without answering, she told him to close his eyes. Junhee didn't understand why, but Doyeon insisted. When he complied, suddenly the girl began to take off her tie and demanded that he lay down without opening his eyes. Even so, Junhee insisted he had a reason for hiding his secret, but Doyeon shut him down. She couldn't believe he had the nerve to enter a girls-only place and even dress like one of them. She asked him what he was thinking. Junhee tried to explain his real reason, but Doyeon, now observing him more closely, realized it truly was the Junhee she knew. She felt foolish for not noticing it earlier. At that moment, his knee brushed against her leg, making Doyeon wonder if the medicine from the experiment was affecting her more than she thought. When Junhee spoke to her, she barely reacted. "Are you okay?" he asked. Still, she insisted that he keep his eyes closed, although Junhee couldn't help but wonder what that strange noise was, or why it seemed like the girl was doing something to the bed. Doyeon warned him that if he dared to look, she would end him. The boy obeyed without question. In Doyeon's mind, doubts swirled about what she was doing, or if she was simply going crazy. She didn't understand why her soul was urging her to be close to him. That's why she had no choice but to reach for the chalice box. Meanwhile, the same question echoed in Yoonhee's mind. What was that soft sensation? It didn't seem like a blanket. However, when he slightly opened his eyes, he was completely stunned. He wondered why she was holding the chalice box. Although he supposed it had something to do with the experiment's medicine, nothing seemed to add up in Doyeon's mind. She couldn't achieve divine revelation with just that. Still, even if her connection to the chalice was faint, she desperately wanted to hold it directly. Nervously, she looked at him and asked if he had opened his eyes, to which he firmly denied it, assuring her he kept them closed. Then the girl proceeded to pull the chalice from the case, but warned Yoonhee that if he moved, she would finish him off. Meanwhile, he kept wondering why she had taken it out. Doyeon began cleaning it with a special technique. She felt an indescribable warmth. The chalice seemed solid and smooth at once, and her soul seemed to resonate with it. Yoonhee, on his part, felt slight discomfort imagining rough stockings, but at the same time, he found comfort knowing Doyeon wasn't hurt and was simply helping to clean it. Trying to check if she was okay, he asked how she was feeling. However, the girl's response was an insult, sharply reminding him to keep his eyes shut. But Yoonhee couldn't take it anymore. Desperate, he kissed her and immediately began to mutter a hurried prayer. Doyeon didn't understand what was happening. Despite how weak he seemed, she noticed his hands were surprisingly steady. She felt a flicker of fear. That's when Yoonhee's mind flashed back to the first time he had seen Doyeon trembling and crying in front of him. He could only recall the last time he saw her in that state. It hadn't been long since she became class representative. Back then, the teacher had mentioned that organizing the ID photos would be a hassle. Because Doyeon didn't have time to complete the initial registration, the teacher sought a volunteer to help her. Yoonhee knew it was the teacher's job, but he also realized no one would raise their hand. Nobody talked to Doyeon. They were all afraid of her, and therefore, nobody would help. In the end, the teacher simply pointed to the substitute, Yoonhee, to assist her. Doyeon told Yoonhee to stay after class to finish the task. In his mind, he felt like she was dragging him into a trap. After the fallout she had with her friends, the right thing should have been to feel scared. However, what truly unsettled him was how beautiful Doyeon's legs looked. Even though he tried to deny that thought, deep down he couldn't help but think she didn't seem as intimidating as everyone said. While the girl was handing him the draft papers, Yoonhee grabbed it but accidentally pinched her hand. She immediately screamed at him, yelling that he had hurt her finger. He, surprised, immediately let go, and when she told him it hurt, she ordered him to pick it up. When he bent down to do so, Doj kicked it away. Confused, Yoonhee asked why she had done that, to which she responded with a mischievous smile that it was her revenge. At that moment, he thought that maybe she just liked to tease her friends. In other words, she was a normal girl. But their little game was interrupted by something else, a commotion between Yoongjee and Yoonhee. Junhee was always bothering her, and this time she was trying to put makeup on her to make her look prettier. Although Dasom and Han saw it as harmless fun, Han noticed that Yoongjee didn't seem very comfortable. Dojeon stood up from her seat and walked over to where the girls were. She didn't want to be left out of the makeup session. She grabbed the mascara and asked Yoongjee if she could try too. The latter agreed without hesitation, something that worried Junhee because he wasn't sure if Dojeon still had the same rough habits she used to have. Dojeon was about to start the session, but ended up smudging Youngjee's cheek instead. Youngjee curiously asked what she was doing or if it was some kind of prank. However, Dojeon responded that the only one playing around was her, questioning everyone else. Junhee was surprised since it had been Youngjee who asked for help in the first place, something Young-ho confirmed with a slight nod. For Dojeon, though, it was just another lie. In her mind, all bullies use that same tactic. She believed Youngjee was just harassing her under the pretense of being friendly, because she could never outright say she didn't want the makeup. Meanwhile, Youngjee thought Dojeon was only acting like that because she was the class rep, until she realized something else. Even though Dojeon accused others of bullying, she herself constantly picked on the insolent Yoonhee. Youngjee remembered how Dojeon was always hitting him, and in a challenging tone, asked if that wasn't also bullying. Dojeon tried to defend herself, but Youngjee insisted there was no difference, carefully watching her reactions. Then the girl threw a direct question. "Do you like Yoonhee?" Now everything made sense. She was always trying to get his attention after all. He was very popular. The comment infuriated Dojeon, who raised her hand intending to slap Youngjee. However, in the middle of the strike, it was Yoonhee who ended up getting hit. Alarmed, Dojeon immediately wanted to take him to the infirmary. Luckily for him, the argument between Dojeon and Youngjee ended right there. He missed the last class since he had to stay in the infirmary. But what worried him the most was being alone with Dojon. She insisted he should stay lying down. When he looked at the clock, Yoonhee realized class should already be over, so he asked the girl what she was doing. Focused, she was organizing the seating chart as the teacher had instructed. Yoonhee wanted to help, but she told him to rest. Still, he insisted that he could just apply glue to the pictures while lying down. Seeing no harm, Dojon let him do as he pleased. Among the photos, there were a couple that caught his attention because the people in them looked very similar. Before talking about the hit she had given him, Dojon apologized. She had promised herself never to do something like that again, but admitted it was harder than she thought. That's why she decided to distance herself from her old friends once they moved on to second year. She even got new glasses to study better. She noticed that Yoonhee had somehow helped her stop fighting, and for that, she thanked him. In Yoonhee's mind, the faint blush on Dojon's face, visible even through her glasses, was etched permanently. She was trying hard to change, and he, considering himself a decent person, wanted to support her as the class rep. After all, she still liked to tease him, but perhaps it was something common between close friends. On one occasion, while helping her change the light bulb in the classroom, Dojon yelled at him, accusing him of spying on her. Yoonhee denied it, but she was convinced he was lying and kicked him anyway. Still, their playful bickering never really stopped, although maybe he was the only one who saw it that way. Returning to the present, when Yoonhee kissed Dojon, he whispered that he was about to fetch the holy water. That completely took her by surprise. At that moment, he began using the sacred water. Doyo noticed it was way too much, which made her furious. "Are you crazy?" she exclaimed. "You can't treat someone's soul like it's just a toy." But Yoonhee silenced her again with his hand and continued preparing everything for the consecration. Just before he could remove the lid from the Danonino, Dune, so embarrassed, stopped him and pushed his hand away, leaning closer to whisper in his ear, "I'll do it myself." Saying this, she started organizing all the preparations for the ceremony, her hands trembling slightly. Even though the girl was clearly blushing, she asked the boy if he was happy. In that moment, he realized for the first time the precious treasure that had been hidden before him. He couldn't believe that the person who always caught everyone's attention was now so close, sharing a sacred moment with him. Without hesitation, he began reading the Bible, which made the girl wonder if the prayers had already started. However, what surprised her most was how quickly he was moving. Even though she asked him to slow down, the boy ignored her and, without warning, grabbed some of the buns she had kept aside. Dojon, on her part, advised him to be gentler, reminding him that she was sensitive. But Yoonhee, deep inside, noticed that her corruption had been overflowing for a long time, so he decided to try something different to purify her sins. Gently, he gave her a small kiss on the foot, which made her call him crazy and ask what he was trying to achieve. Junhee didn't pay it any mind and continued with his prayers and reading at full speed, even using the holy water to restore her soul. Nevertheless, she wanted to know why he had used the water like that. Meanwhile, inside Yoongee's mind, he felt the medicine had altered him too much. He tried to help her by removing her soaked socks, but she refused, trying to stop him. It was then he noticed a scratch mark on her skin. With a serious tone, he asked if that wound came from back then. Doji avoided his gaze, not wanting him to see, but Yoonhee already knew she had that scar. It was something that had happened before. Let's go back in time. At the beginning of the semester, there had been many events, and Doj seemed to take every opportunity to delegate the heaviest tasks to Yoonhee. One day, he wanted to know when the announcements about the spring picnic would be made. She replied that it would probably be next week. Among the planned activities was club registration. Yoonhee was searching for a club where he could relax until he overheard Han and Daesun talking. Daesun mentioned she would be joining the choir again, like the previous year. This made him think that if he also signed up, he could experience something special with her. He had already decided which club to join. But the next day, he found himself in the reading club. Everything happened unexpectedly, and it seemed unfair, as the teacher forced him to join due to the high demand for the choir club. Since he was the class representative's substitute, he had to accept the change. Still, he thought at least reading didn't seem that hard. Later, he overheard Junhee apologizing, saying she knew he had been forced to join. Yoonhee immediately denied it, saying he loved reading and that it would make him smarter. Though he knew deep down that wasn't true, he didn't think it was fair to take it out on her. Junhee, upon hearing the word smarter, reacted with interest, as nobody usually considered her attractive due to her reserved nature. For Yoonhee, it was curious that she wore glasses. He figured she probably had poor eyesight, and also noticed the marks they left on her nose. He wondered if Doj went through the same thing. Moved by curiosity, he asked Junhee to look at him for a moment. She, not understanding why, did so. But before he could say anything else, Doyeon appeared, asking for his help to move some things to the teacher's lounge. Junhee apologized to Junhee for leaving so abruptly, but before walking away, he asked if she had ever considered using contact lenses, saying she would probably look better without glasses. That left her speechless. For Junhee, spring brought even more exciting events. Once March and April passed, the spring picnic at Kunam Mountain was held. In his mind, all he had to do was make sure he ended up in the same group as Dasam. However, when the teacher was about to announce the event's details, she declared that the organization would be left to the class representative and her substitute. Before leaving, she wished them a nice weekend. Taking the opportunity, Do Johan asked Junhee what he would do during the break. Without a clear answer, he supposed he'd just stay home. Then she invited him to Kunam Mountain, saying they needed to go early to make sure everything was ready for the picnic. This caught Yoni's attention so much that she warned her back row classmate not to even try stopping her. That afternoon, Junhee was exhausted. For him, hiking without preparations or caution was complete recklessness. Doyeon, on the other hand, blamed Jan for spreading the word about their plan to explore the mountain over the weekend. She didn't want others getting the wrong idea about them or starting rumors. Junhee, not fully understanding the situation, didn't get why they had to go right after class. He also wondered what Yeonji's real motive was. After all, no one would probably believe her story anyway. He even mentioned to Doge that he didn't care about rumors, but visibly nervous, she asked him to stop murmuring. He understood her concern and decided to stop complaining, although it was still difficult to predict when she was upset or how she would react. For him, that day was another reminder of how unpredictable life could be, just like the weather on the mountain. Suddenly, heavy rain began to fall around them. Worried, Junhee asked Do-Jon if they were still following the right path, as the storm was getting worse quickly, and he thought it would be safer to turn back. However, she barely paid attention until she finally admitted they might be lost. Thunder echoed through the mountains. With no better option, they decided to take shelter under a tree. Doje had no idea how to proceed, while for Junhee, the solution seemed simple. They had to retrace their steps. But the sun was already setting, and because it was spring, nightfall came even faster. This left them in an even trickier situation. Doyeon scolded him, saying he should have brought a map, but Junhee, crossing his arms, thought that was her responsibility anyway. He still hoped they'd find the way back before it got completely dark. Since the rain wasn't stopping, Do Johan decided to keep moving forward. However, Junhee warned her that the path she was taking wasn't the one they had come from. Doubtful, she asked if he was sure, but before she could get an answer, her foot slipped. The only thing heard was her scream as her body plummeted into the void. When she opened her eyes, she realized she was about to fall off a cliff. Her body trembled uncontrollably with fear. But before she could react, she felt Junhee grabbing her legs tightly. "Pull me up, quickly," she sobbed. But he couldn't do it as fast as she wanted. His position was unstable, and any wrong move could endanger them both. Terrified, Do-Jon started kicking in desperation, making the situation even worse. "Stop moving," he commanded firmly. However, during the struggle, Junhee briefly lost his grip, causing her to slip slightly. A muffled scream escaped Doyeon's lips as she watched one of her sneakers fall into the abyss. Fortunately, he managed to tighten his grip just in time, before it was too late. In his mind, he could only think that her life was completely in his hands. Meanwhile, the wound on his face started to sting, but that wasn't the most important thing at that moment. What truly shocked him was seeing Do-Jon cry for the first time, just as her other shoe also fell into the abyss. After what felt like an eternity, he finally managed to pull her up. Without being able to contain herself, she hugged him tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. Her words were barely audible, so Junhee asked her to repeat them. "I was so scared," she mumbled between sobs. He silently observed how her clothes were covered in mud and soaked from the rain. He could barely understand what she was saying, because she kept trembling in his arms. Moments later, he managed to separate her a little and noticed something he hadn't seen before, a wound on her leg that was bleeding. Without hesitation, he tore a part of his shirt and used it to clean the wound and make an improvised bandage. When the storm finally subsided, he carried her and carefully descended the mountain. Once they reached the city, Junhee took Doyeon to the hospital. Since his own injuries weren't as severe, he decided to go home afterward. However, when he got into the shower, he noticed something strange. When he took off his vest, a blood-stained piece of cloth fell to the floor. It was the stockings Do-Jon had been wearing. He stared at it for a few seconds. a strange feeling rising in his chest. Will she be okay? He asked himself in a low voice, unable to take his eyes off the red-stained fabric. When Monday arrived and classes started, Dujan was still absent. As usual, their teacher dismissed the situation quickly, avoiding any detailed explanation. Even after the first part of the school day was over, Yoonhee couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't shown up. Were her injuries more serious than he had thought? From his seat, he could only stare at her empty chair. At that moment, he heard Junhee comment that, considering Yoonhee's own condition, it was likely that Doyeon had gotten away without much trouble. She even bet that Doyeon was just using the situation as an excuse to skip class. Yoonhee was about to defend her, but just then,